Welcome back, everybody. I hope you had a nice break there. I'm Lisette Scheer, and I'll be our next presenter. I'll be doing SQL neat tips and tricks. And so this is a lot of this is stuff that I have on like a Google Doc for myself where I'm like, when I need to do this thing, here I have them all nicely bookmarked for myself. And so I'm just going to go through a few different things. If I can make it actually go. So a couple things about library groups. I'm working a consortium, so a lot of our reports that we would like to use care about your group. And so we've done a lot of reporting with that, how to limit to a group, but also how to get the group description instead of the ID, because when it comes up and says ID 21, that's not always so helpful. We're also going to do some links both to other reports and editing things directly, which was a little bit about what George's presentation that he was hoping to do was. So hopefully if you're interested in that, this will help cover that. Oh, I'm not sharing my screen. Thanks, Jason. Is that now you can see it? Looks good. Okay, thanks. And also just a little bit, something that we've done in the action logs that's really helpful for us that I thought might be helpful for you. And then we'll have some time for questions at the end, or if you want to see more. So here we go. Library groups. So our consortium, it's like 47 libraries now, I think. And we have a mix of standalone schools or standalone libraries or schools like Asotin High School. We've got school districts and we've got library districts. And so these are like our groups here in a dropdown. It's pretty easy to just stick it in. You just do the like where library groups parent ID equals the groups. That one was when we first had library groups. The parent ID is, that tells you which group it's part of, basically. It'll say like this library is part of this other group, and that's the parent ID. And so that's how you need to look for that. And I just highlighted down here. This is just a report, or well, no, not this report. One of the reports I have is just a report of all of our groups and which libraries are in them. So that's just pretty helpful. And you have to join library groups. I almost always do it based on like item home branch, because most of our reports that we use this for are for like shelf lists or circulation reports for like a whole district instead of just a single group or a single branch. But the more fun thing is to get the parent description. And this one's a little trickier because you have to call a table twice, which I pretty much learned how to do this for this. It's cool, you can pull tables more than once and you can give them like an alias. So you can say for this one, you have to call the table twice. I call it usually as LG child and LG parent, or sometimes I'll do like call left join library groups LGP and LGC, so it's less type in, especially on bigger reports. This is the one that just gives a list of my report, my groups. Come on. There we go. So it gives you the ID, the parent title, parent description. So you can pull either way. I think in this one we had it pull the both the title and the description. But you can use that anywhere that you would have a report with groups, so that you can get it's just a little more readable, especially like we have a bunch of reports that are run as cron jobs, and so being able to run and not just be like, okay, which one's ID2 again? ID2 is Asotin County, 21's Latah County, you know. So just to help make those reports look a little nicer, especially for the not systems people who are running these reports, because we know you know, the systems people know how to find the right ID and everything. But if we're just sending this report to someone it's potentially going to be less helpful if they don't know about the IDs. So that's kind of how to do a group description. And all these slides will be up, and I have the relevant code as much as possible. Some of the reports that I link to are a little bit long. Some of these link ones have a lot of information. Basically, I'm going to break down a little bit how to do a link, which uses the concat statement, where you have to like select as a concat because you're putting together multiple pieces. Which I guess I should have also done an example of, you can put together like a patron's first and last name as a concat. It doesn't necessarily need to be a link. You can do multiple fields in like one table or one row cell. And so within the statement, you can find at the top of any of these, or like in your koha for any of these, there's this CGI bin and the report. In this case, reports. You can do these links for any part of koha. And if you start with the CGI bin, it means that you have less things that you have to type in, but also it can be used like both on your test server and your regular server, or it can be put in the library and it's easy for people to share. You don't need like the, in our case, like valnet.bywatersolutions.com. You can just start with the CGI bin and it'll work. And so then we want to like run this report number and or have it come up to this report. And so then we have to tell the report that it equals the ID that's coming up. And so that's the like report ID from the table. I should have had shown you the whole report first, but this way it'll give you a link to the list of reports in the first column, because I said select concat first, based on the ID of the report. But we're going to do a little bit more here. I like to always add, when I'm ending it, do target blank. So if you're just clicking on the link, it'll open it in a new tab. But then you also have to define what your column is going to say. So like, once again, it's the ID field is going to get put in there. And then you want to end your link, end your concat statement, and define it as ID. And that just means that instead of saying this whole statement at the top or something else, it'll label the column ID. You can even take it a step further and add the link directly to edit the report, because the example that I pulled this from was from when we updated to 1911. There were some tables that changed, and so Bywater gave all of us Bywater partners a support or a report for any reports that needed to be changed because they were using the old tables. And so this is the results of that report. And I have it in two links, actually. I have link as an edit and then the ID separately, because I just added the edit column to what they already had. And so then this way, and a lot of these reports aren't really used anymore. That's why we haven't updated them. But this way, if you wanted to go in and edit them, you could just click the link and it would take you to where you can edit to fix the, I think it's those account type is what the report was telling us. And so that's really helpful because it just saves you clicks, especially if you're doing a lot, which is one of my other examples is a lot. Or the reason I ended up doing it was that there were a lot of things I needed to fix. And that's what this one is. So when we closed for COVID, our consortium had self-registration turned on, but we didn't have the auto member number turned on. So it wasn't automatically signing card numbers. And our consortium decided to turn that on so that our patrons could access our digital resources, even though we were closed. And so we came across this problem where we had a few staff like tech services and like self checkout cards that were just like 9999999, really high numbers. And so the AutoMemnum was trying to give all our new patrons super high card numbers that didn't work with our validation, because our validation for at least some of ours looks at the first set of digits, because we all have the first like 8 digits in our card number. And so I got a report from Bywater that gave me just a list of how long the card number is, because a lot of them were also more than 14 digits, which is one of our checks. And I don't remember if it linked to the borrower number originally, but what I ended up doing, oh wow, oh there we go, is making it so that it would link directly to where you can edit the card number. And so then you could go in and edit the card number directly, so it wasn't a problem. Because we had, I think it was about 112 cards that by the time we figured out what was going on between the original problem cards and all the new self-registration cards, because we got a lot of self-registration when we first opened it up and everything was closed. And so this just let us come in and like put a note on the patron's account that we had issued them a new card number. We could, almost all of our patrons that we needed to, we could just like click and send an email to. And that really cut down how long it took to do the process. And still sometimes we'll get like a library that accidentally scans, like when they're issuing a new physical card to someone, accidentally scans like a book barcode instead. And our book barcodes start with 3, so then that automatically bumps everything up out of the correct card number range. And so like there's a lot that you can do with linking out of reports. You can link to other reports. You can even like link to other reports that will run based on the parameters of this report, which is, that's what George was going to talk about, and it's very cool. I haven't yet implemented something like that, but it's very neat. I've heard him talk about it a little bit. And then one of the other things that we've been dealing with some lately is our action logs. Action logs can be difficult to find what you want sometimes. We've got like a lot of different ways that you can find things in the action logs, and sometimes how it actually works is different than the way that you think it's going to work. So sometimes it's easier to find a certain action log items from reports. So this is a report we have that will give you the information for a certain patron card number, any holds that were added or changed or deleted. And this is just mine. I had it run straight to my card. But you put in a card number and a date range, and you can identify like if you're trying to figure out why someone's hold got canceled or something, or when it was filled, or any sort of thing. Like here I have, oh, when we were doing some testing with our new hold slips, we have some hold slips similar to those great ones that Joe presented on this morning, where we like changed it based on which library you're at, but also some other parameters in the patron slip. And so when we were testing all of these, we were like placing and modifying all these holds so we could print out the different versions of the hold slips. But it's also really helpful if you're like trying to figure out why someone's hold got canceled or who canceled it. And this one again is actually another concat. This is this column here. We concatted the librarian first name, surname, and card number as librarian. So it's really easy to see. Instead of like the librarian biblio number or just the card number, we concatted it so it's like one really readable column. And it just gives you, it looks very similar here to the action logs. It's just the same SQL statements, and it's in pretty much the same order, like timestamp, who did it, what did they do, what was the object, which interface was it on? But you could also change things up. If you didn't care which interface it was on, you could get rid of that. Or if you wanted other information, you can also do some interesting stuff with the action log where with patrons, because if you're looking for patron information, now it has the like before and after options when you're editing a patron. And so I'm going to show you one other report here that uses the action logs. I'm not going to run it because it's we use it to check all of our patron cards are being done via self-registration now. We're not doing any like paper applications or anything. And so we have, oh, where'd you go? There we go. We'll select a branch, and when 1129, when the patrons were added, well, originally it was when the patrons were added. We've tweaked it a little bit using some action log SQL to, if it will load, there we go. Let's see. So we linked the action logs table on the object equals the borrower number and the module equals members, and the info like before it equaled self-registration, because then we're only checking the patrons for accuracy that have been changed from a self-registered card to a new, an adult card or a youth card or whatever. And we'll be able to easily check that. Before, we had someone who would go and they'd look at each paper application and search for the patron. So now we can run a report, and then we can pretty easily look through for like if something's missing or if something has information we don't need that's been filled out, and check it for accuracy pretty easily that way. And then we did set up still like a link just to their account if we needed to go look at something on there, or to send a link. We make them put their initials in, our staff members, so we can send the links back to them and say, here's what you did wrong. You need to get the correct information in here, or add a note, or put this in the right field. And so that's all some interesting things we've done with action logs. Oh yeah, some borrower attributes are also an interesting thing to cover, because this was the first time, this report that I used here, that was the first time I'd done a report with borrower attributes. We hadn't really used them. And so we joined borrower attributes, but then also the types of attributes, so we could put them each in. Oh, actually, because we had originally had the borrower attribute types each in as a separate column. That's actually not necessary anymore, it turns out, because we have the borrower attribute group concat. That's another cool thing. So we group the concat. That'll group multiple different borrower attributes, because we have a few. We have like a geographic home library that we use for some statistical purposes. We have our staff put their initials in on new cards. We have at Latah County like a newsletter patron attribute. So when a new patron signs up, if they want to sign up for our newsletter, we can just say yes. And then we can run a report to add them to our newsletter program when we do that, which is just like a few times a year. And this was a neat trick that Andrew at Bywater told me when I was working on this report. You can set the separator for a group concat to be all sorts of things, but if you set it to be a break, it will give a new line for each attribute. So we can actually, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to run this report and then just show you the part that has the attributes because it's actually far away from any patron information. So I'm just going to set it up on the other side of the screen. Where it's like mostly here. So each of those attributes comes up as its own line, which just looks really neat when you're reading through, because then you don't need to, figure out. You can always say like, okay, the newsletter attributes first, and then the location, and then the staff member, and it's just really easy to read down and see, is everything there? And so that's a really helpful, neat little tip that I learned recently and wanted to share with all of you. I really always think that SQL is going to take me longer to talk about than it does. And it's probably because I do way too much of it. And so I probably burned through some of that faster than I meant to. SQL is a lot of what I do. So let me actually go back. Let's see. These link to the reports, I only showed part of the data or part of the SQL that was relevant to the linking. But I'll go ahead. Yeah, this is the reports 911. So that's the select the edit as ID or as edit, and then the ID, report name, when it was last run, our reports saved SQL. And then this is I always forget what this is called. Reg.exp is always how I remember it because that's what I always see. Basically where it includes the account type or manual invoice or guarantor ID. And we only had to include reports that were run in the last year because we don't really need to be editing them if they're not getting used. So that's the full SQL for that. And then that's the full SQL for this because this was just our report for the library groups. So that's pretty easy. Not too big to fit on the screen. I guess, is there anything that like you on the YouTube comments wish you knew how to do in SQL, or that you saw me do or mention and want to find out more about that? And here, I'll move this over here so I can see if there's any questions or comments. Okay, so I see in the chat, I think it's much better readable to take it directly from the old reserves table. Yeah, a lot of the times when we're doing that report with the action logs, a lot of times it's not actually for things that are in the old reserves table. It's for things that are in the reserves table where someone has moved themselves or their patron at a different library up the list. That was actually why we got that report set up in the first place was we had a staff member at a library who it turned out hadn't been trained not to do that, um, and was just like bumping her patrons up the list because she thought she was doing it for like her patrons for her items only. And so we don't want to just be looking at the old reserves table because because it's often not for old reserves. It's often for more recent reserves. And also, I see you said I was doing a report on holds 2 days ago because if someone cancels their hold after it's prepared for them at the desk. I thought Koha stopped them from canceling it once it was ready. I didn't think they had the ability to cancel it unless something's changed. I'm only on 1911, so if that's been added, I wouldn't have seen that yet. Yeah, the only way we ever do that is if someone calls us and says you that they don't want the report anymore. Yes, we could union the action logs table and the old reserves, or the reserves and the old reserves, and probably get the same information. Um, and it probably would be more readable. Okay, yeah, so nope, at least in our 1905 it's not. So in your 1905, they can't cancel holds once they're ready, right? Just making sure I'm reading that correctly. You didn't find a way to block users from canceling filled holds. Because I was under the impression, and this has been my experience, that once it's in transit or waiting for a patron, they no longer have the ability to cancel it. But maybe that's a system preference setting that was already set up for us. That might be worth asking the listserv about, the Koha community listserv about, because I don't know all the system preferences that go into that. Weird. Yeah, I'd definitely ask on the listserv because if there's a set, it's possible there's either some customization or a certain set of preferences that would let you do that. So that's interesting. I was hoping to get some more information on here about, I saw near the beginning of when we were all shut down last spring, I saw a presentation where someone had been highlighting using formatting on the reports, and I was like, oh, that's really cool. But I haven't actually had time to get that set up on any of my reports because we've been so slammed with just changing all the different system preferences. But that's another cool thing you can do with reports. Let me think. I mean, does anyone else have any report questions? We've been setting up a lot of our reports to be automated, where they run a cron job and we get them like all our annual stats emailed to us monthly on the first of it. like first of the month, get all the last month's stats. So we've been doing set up a bunch of automated reports here that are just the same as other reports that we have, but maybe don't have selectors or dates. Oh yeah, so Thomas in the chat. Yeah, you just use usual HTML, but I think to do some formatting where you could say like, I want this column to show up in blue, or I want this column to be bolded. Just kind of similar to the concat, I think, where you just put it kind of around. But the presentation I saw also was like, only have items that are above a certain value highlighted in red or something like that. And so like that's a cool thing with reports I learned about recently. You used to be able to, and I think there's some jQuery out there that fixes this. Used to be able to do HTML in the notes, which would make nice little lists. And that's why we have all these like breaks here. Oh yeah, Thomas put in the chat if yeah, so that's like an example of some formatting based on the results. So like if it's withdrawn, or let's see, if it's weighed in, make it blue. If it's found, make it green. Yeah, so that's some really neat stuff that you can do with reports, and I'm looking forward to doing some of that eventually. Although you can't use those in automated reports because any HTML, like for links or for formatting, will just come out as the HTML if you do an automated report. Oh, and he put another example in the chat. If found, make it orange. Yeah, so that's kind of my tips and tricks that I have right now. I might have a couple more that if I come across anything else, I'll just add it also to this same presentation slides so that anyone else can have access to it. And I'll make sure that in the notes, at least, there's the full SQL from those reports. Some of them were a little bit big to put all the way on the slides. You know, like this one fit fine, but some of these reports had a lot more going on. Let's see. Does anyone have any other questions or their own tips and tricks they'd like to share? I know this wasn't as exciting as the absolute SQL nerdery that George was going to present on. I was very much looking forward to that presentation because that was some new and exciting things that I hadn't done before. There we go. If we don't have any other questions or other tips and tricks that people would like to share, we can go ahead and take a little bit of a break before our next meeting. Okay, so Thomas said this is from the report on reserves using the check name. So waiting resolved. Awesome. Thank you for putting those down there. Um, let's see. What time is our general meeting for the day supposed to start, or for the month? So that's at 1:15, and that did go out in the email. Heather learned a lot of great info here for an SQL beginner. Is there anything that I like glossed over that you'd like me to cover a little deeper? Because I went pretty fast through some of that stuff. And we've got some time. Or if there's another thing that you're wondering if reports can do, or if you can do a certain way in reports. I don't always have the answers. I wouldn't say I'm like, let's see. Oh yeah, you have 200 custom reports in use. Our consortium currently has about 600 in our system, many of which are not in use, but we're trying to, we've been working on cleaning those up. For a while we were up at like 900, but we got a lot cleaned up. You know, that's a great question. Oh, it's concatenate or con. I don't know how you actually say it, but it's concatenate. Thank you. I was like, I know I'm saying it wrong. Thanks, Jason. So concatenate, and then it's like you can have concatenated a thing. It's a verb that means to like link things together, basically in like a series. Connection of multiple strings. Yeah. And it can be really handy, not just for links, but like I used in this example where we put the librarian first name and then a space, and then librarian last name and then a space. You know, for field names, I pretty much always just look at the schema, which I usually just Google it and it's the first thing that comes up if I'm not on my computer at building, but it's just schema.koha-community.org, and then you can find whichever version of Koha you're on. And they updated the schema a couple years ago, and this is much nicer, or maybe it was like last year, because you can kind of filter. So like if you know that you're looking for, I'm not going to do action logs because that's right there at the top, like the borrower's table, and then just go ahead and look. Usually if I'm report writing, I'll just have the schema open. I almost always have two screens. So like when I'm home, I have my laptop and another screen, and when I'm at work, I have two screens. And so usually I'll have like my report that I'm working on and my schema up on the two separate screens. Because almost inevitably, when I don't do that, I mess up the field names. And then when I run the report, it's like field name, last name doesn't exist. And you're like, oh yeah, it's surname. So I just always check the schema. If there are things that you're working with a lot when you're doing reports, like if you're almost always doing borrowers stuff, what I did at one point, back when the schema was more difficult to navigate, because it was just like one really big long list and it just wasn't as nicely formatted before they switched over, is I actually copied like the whole table, but then just deleted everything but the column, but this column. And so, and then I printed out just the fields that I actually care about. Like we don't use we never use the facts. We don't ask people for the facts. I think we've hidden it on the OPAC. So like I just deleted any of those fields we didn't use and just like printed it out and had it up on my wall when I was doing a lot of bar reports. Now it's a lot easier to just use the schema. I think, but that's definitely something you could do where you could print out or make like a document for yourself of like, these are the fields that I'm using a lot. Especially if it's just like you're mostly pretty good at remembering, but like maybe you just always misremember what one field is. Then maybe just like make yourself a little document that's like, I always try to call borrower's home branch the wrong thing. Then I'd like make myself a note that like it's borrower's branch code instead of borrower's home branch. That's one thing I do a lot. I almost always try putting home branch because that's what it is for items. And so then when I come to do a borrower report, I'm like, home branch, and then it doesn't work. And then let's see, there's been some chat. Yeah, Jason, I looked it up in the other, Jason said, don't ask me to find it. I Googled it on my other screen because I couldn't remember what it stood for. Tomas is looking directly into MariaDB adminer wiki SQL page for inspiration. Oh yeah, that's another great place too if you're like, especially folks who here who are newer to SQL, the wiki.koha community. You can see what I've been working on lately because it comes up straight to the template toolkit notices. But there are a lot of reports on here. Some of them are old enough that they don't work. Most of them I think are pretty up to date. And so there's some like miscellaneous reports. Here's a workaround for a bug. This is always a good place to start. I always forget the easiest way to get to the top. But also we've been moving, or a couple years ago moved over, holds patrons in circulation each to their own report pages because that page is so long. And so this is a great place to look for things. Even if like a lot of times I'll start here and then add in like a branch selector or a group selector. Oh yeah, so there's also Mana in addition to the wiki. We don't have that set up on our system yet, although I'm hoping once we get our test server set up, we'll be able to test it on there before, so I can convince people how great it is. That's also got some good reports. In the chat, Thomas said, Mana's not working for us yet. Any source for how to make it useful? I know I've seen some blog posts about it, but I'm not sure off the top of my head. I mean, so on the wiki, there's a page on the wiki for setting it up. The system preference. I believe there's something that has to be set on the back end, not just on the system preference, but I'm not 100% sure since we don't have that set up yet. That's just my impression from what I remember last time I saw a presentation about it. Oh yeah, there's a Bywater did a blog post about it. Just kind of what is it and how to activate it. So there's a system preference, and then you have to get an account creation from Mana. And then say share. Oh, so maybe I was wrong. Maybe it didn't have to be in the back end. But this is more about sharing content, sharing the subscription sharing. I know that there's also reports and maybe more stuff in the serials than just subscription. I'm not 100% sure about that. Yeah, Jennifer Bywater has a blog post about setting it up. One thing that's really nice about Koha is that if you search for something like mana koha, you're going to come up with a lot of helpful things because the IRC is logged, and so sometimes you'll get things out of there. The email list is logged, so sometimes you'll get email chains that are helpful, especially if you have really specific problems and you can like put in more information. And then also like you can always ask on the IRC. They're great folks. Okay. And always on the listserv too. It's good to ask questions there. So we have a great community. Both, we have our US mailing list and we meet monthly, but also like the international community for Koha is great. And in both cases, like never be afraid to ask someone for help. At the very least, we can try to point you in the right direction, even though I'm like, I don't actually have Mana set up or know that much about it, except that it's great to get reports out of and also to put reports into to share what you have as well. But it's so good to be able to reach out to people and get answers. Pretty much nowhere, no one like won't email you back or won't. I mean, you might not always get the answers on the listserv if no one knows the answer. But like if you're in the IRC, a lot of times they can say like, oh, I don't really know about that, but so-and-so who's here might be able to help you. Oh yeah, so the Koha community listserv. Oh, that's us. Koha community. So under get involved, I think it's there. Koha mailing list. And so there's a general mailing list. There's also like developers, all activity in Koha's Bugzilla. You get a lot of emails if you sign up for that. If you're interested in documentation, there's a mailing list for that. If you're interested in working with translations, there's a mailing list just for that. And that one is not up to date. I'll have to fix that. We have a koha-US mailing list. That link isn't good. We'll update that today or tomorrow. We had an issue with Mana. We found that we had to have both reports and serials on the user to be able to search and create Mana reports. Oh, that's interesting. That sounds like a bug. It seems like you should be able to just have reports if you just want reports. Yeah, permissions for Mana reports are currently linked to permissions in serials. That's not great. We don't want that. That's good to know. And good to be aware of if you haven't started using Mana yet and are trying. Or if you're having trouble with Mana, oh yeah, we could, it might be worth checking to see if the people who are trying to use Mana have that serial subscription. On our website, under the Learn from koha-US page, we also have some SQL stuff. Oh, and the mailing lists are linked here as well. We have lots of great info here. Let's see. Those are all under reports, I believe. So we have some like older, like MySQL for beginners, basic SQL for Koha users, videos and or sometimes I think it's just slides. We've got links also to the Wiki Reports library using just some different videos here, the Seek and Find SQL resource, and all of these are available for anyone to use, not just like koha-US members, not just people in the United States. Anyone who wants to use any of our educational materials that we've put up. We've got quite a few. We've got a couple quick reference guides. We're working on some more. One for template toolkit. I think we're working on a SQL more advanced one, maybe. And then one thing also that might be helpful is that all of our, at least since Monterey, all of our presentations, or most of them, have been recorded and posted on our website. And one thing that's still on the education committee's to-do list is to eventually try to, catalog those same presentations into the proper other pages on our education page. But there are also some additional SQL presentations on there as well. So I think we're going to take a quick break before we come back for our general meeting.